Does Donald Trump want to end the Fed or control it? We're going to talk about the federal criminal investigation into Fed Chair Jerome Powell and what it means, plus the fallout from the ICE shootings in Minnesota and the terror of unaccountable masked law enforcement officials. Also, what about California's wealth tax? Are Democrats just tired of billionaires? Sure seems like it. All this and more coming up on today's show. Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture from the editors of Reason Magazine. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Matt Welch, and returning special guest once again, Robby Soave. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much. All right, let's start with Jerome Powell. Powell is obviously the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Over the weekend, it was revealed that the U.S. Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation into him for spending on the Fed's new office project. That investigation was approved last year by Trump ally Jeanine Pirro. But by nearly every account, this has basically nothing to do with offices and office furniture and elevators and all the stuff that they were complaining about in some of the congressional hearings. Instead, this is about interest rates. Trump has pressured Powell to lower interest rates basically since he came into office, and Trump has reportedly been looking to oust Powell in response. Katherine, libertarians like to say we should end the Fed, right? We don't want it anymore. But it seems like Trump isn't trying to end the Fed or the central bank here. He just wants to run it. That doesn't seem better.
Yeah, so one of the many libertarian arguments for ending the Fed is so that it won't be subject to shenanigans like this. Like, this is the whole problem, is if you have a body with some dudes, even, and ladies, even the most unimpeachably expert, elevated dudes and ladies imaginable, there will always be the possibility for humans to put pressure on other humans, and that creates a kind of political risk in our economy that, by the end the Fed case, doesn't need to be there.
Robby, it seems like there's a pattern here in which Trump uses legal pressure against his political enemies. I mean, you can think about it's James Comey, right? It's Letitia James. And those, the prosecutions didn't ultimately pan out, right? But there was that late night Truth Social DM from just a couple of months ago, if you guys remember, where Trump complained that his enemies weren't being prosecuted hard or fast enough. And this sort of seems like it's kind of a piece with that. I mean, Trump just seems to be using the Department of Justice to go after people he doesn't like for political reasons.
Yeah, even by the standards of Trump administration investigative efforts, this one seems particularly hard to find any substance or way to defend it. Some of the individuals you mentioned, I suppose the thinking is they pursued Trump applying maybe some creative uses of the law. We know that often the law on paper allows for a great deal of actual person is confusing, as can be exercised conveniently or politically. Like, there's always a law on the book that can get you on. And if you try to plead your innocence, they can get you on obstruction or perjury or something. They try really hard, they can get you. And Trump trying to apply that kind of logic to people who have crossed his path is, I think, bad. But then you have to go back to the, again, creative ways they tried to go after him. But all of that you can largely set aside for this. This is not about how this is just an official, Jerome Powell, who has a policy that Trump does not agree with and who's operating from within an agency that is very specifically supposed to be independent of political considerations. Now, I think we can talk about, and as many libertarians have, about all the ways in which that has never actually been true for the Fed, all sorts of pressures, how it operates as a political entity, right? There's no such thing as an apolitical government organization. It has its own self-serving interests, though if they were going along with Trump's, that would be bad. If they were deliberately not doing Trump's because they have their own agenda, that would be bad. But at the end of the day, this is not at all about the existence of the Fed or the structure of the Fed or making it comport with some libertarian idea of how the economy should work. This is just Trump, even more transparently than usual, using some tool in a way that just I don't think can be defended. And in fact, I'm not really seeing anyone, any of the usual MAGA character, mount some kind of full-throated defense of this. At best, I see them saying, yeah, well, he's not really serious. He's just sending a message. It's trolling. That's what one Republican senator said. Yeah, hard to defend.
There was a report in the Wall Street Journal just a couple of months ago that, in fact, some of Trump's own advisors were the folks who convinced him not to oust Jerome Powell. I don't know, it was October, November, something like that, right? But that he was basically at the point ready to pull the trigger, probably right around when this investigation started, because this investigation is supposed to have started in November, according to the reports. Matt, I would just want to sort of follow up on the question I asked Robby here. When Trump was running for the second term, there were a lot of Trump critics, including people who we might say are sort of TDS types. I mean, really just like everything Trump does is bad people, right? Who cannot ever see anything good in what he does, who said, look, if Trump gets in a second term, he's going to weaponize the Justice Department. But it kind of seems like that's happening. I mean, were they right?
Erase the kinda and the sorta and the seems to. He is. The question is not whether or not Donald Trump is weaponizing the law enforcement apparatus that he was, sworn on the Constitution on his swearing-in ceremony to uphold the Constitution and to faithfully execute the laws. These are laws that are being unfaithfully executed. Maybe not in contravention of the Constitution. He's weaponizing law enforcement in a way that we haven't seen, and a brazenness that we haven't seen in at least 50 years, probably more. That's not the question. The question is, what are the rest of us going to do about it? One person who did something well is a person I don't necessarily usually have a lot of positive things to say about, or negative, Jerome Powell. His video, looking to camera, 2 minutes yesterday on Sunday, talking about this, he called it by its proper name. This is a politicized investigation. They're bending, they're weaponizing law enforcement in order to try to punish the independence of an actor who is, by the way, appointed by Donald Trump, that Trump doesn't like. And that's wrong. And we should say so without clearing our throat about, yeah, but what about that time with the lawfare? All this whataboutism over the years, the idea about whataboutism in its best, purest form is that it does tell you that other people have done bad things, and maybe we can get to the root of the exercise of power and get rid of that possibility and get rid of those bad things as a category. It isn't. So when we're in power, we're going to do that, except even worse. That's how it tends to be used. So one answer for how people should react to this is by not indulging in whataboutism. This is a naked and disgusting attempt by the President of the United States to unfaithfully execute the laws in order to pressure somebody who is in a quasi-independent agency to do what he wants to do. It's gross. There's no excuse for it.
Katherine, I'm going to take Matt's cue there and ask you, what about credit card interest rates? Because there's something else happened over the last week since we last had a podcast, which is that Trump proposed in a Truth Social post or an executive order, who can tell the difference these days, proposed capping credit card interest rates at 10%. Now, this is a proposal. It's not in effect regulation at this point. It's not a law. It's not definitely happening. But this is something that, folks like Bernie Sanders have talked about for a long time. But it seems like, does it stem from the same impulse as Trump wanting the Fed to bring down interest rates? He's against high interest rates. And what would happen if Trump actually managed to cap credit card interest rates at 10%?
I was going to answer yes, but I actually think it doesn't quite come from the same place, because the Fed thing is coming from the place of, Jerome Powell has thwarted me, and I don't like that. Like the way that it's going, that it's sort of unfurling, like it's like audit the Fed's purchases at HomeSense or whatever. Like it's like a weird sort of personalized version of it.
The Trump quote on this, I just have to read this to you. It's so good. I don't know anything about it, he said when he was asked about this investigation. I don't know anything about it, but he's certainly not very good at the Fed, and he's not very good at building buildings.
Yeah. Well,
Perfect Donald Trump quote.
Being good at building buildings is the thing that Donald Trump values the most, actually. And so he does consider that like an incredible burn to say he's not very good at building buildings. Okay, so but there's kind of this like lawfare-ish, I'm doing the investigation as a form of revenge. Admittedly, the reason he wants Powell to act in a certain way is related to his proposal for bringing down credit card interest rates, which is that like he wants Americans to feel like stuff is affordable. He wants Americans to feel like their money is doing what money should be doing. And the problem is that there's this kind of magical thinking of like, we can just change a number on a piece of paper somewhere and that will fix it and have no knock-on effects or no secondary effects or no costs in the long run. And so by saying like, oh, we're just going to fuss with the interest rate, like that will get us everything we want and won't get us anything bad. Similarly, capping credit card rates, it's like, yeah, who wants to pay a lot on their credit cards? No one wants to pay a lot on their credit cards. Great, Trump could fix that. It's all very well and good until everybody's bells and whistles and frills go away, until the accessibility of credit drops dramatically. This is an idea that comes back over and over. Like, what if we just made it against the rules to charge a lot of interest is an idea that humanity has been vibing on for as long as interest has existed, right? Like usury laws. Like this is a deep, deep desire, but you cannot just say, don't do it, and then the problems of debt go away.
It's just not going to work. And I don't think Trump understands economics in this sense. I don't think he knows about the unintended consequences. He doesn't have a point, but it is true that the Fed office building is $700 million over budget already. And it's like not due for another couple of years. I guarantee it is going to be late. But you know why? It's because it's a construction project in Washington, D.C. of any kind. Any construction project in Washington, D.C., if you've done a home renovation, if you follow bar build-outs, if you look at restaurants, if you look at anybody who's building a house for themselves or an office building, any construction project in Washington, D.C. is going to come in over budget and late. Absolutely every single one of them. And what is darkly funny here is that it's actually Trump's tariffs and immigration restrictions that have played a big role in making home renovations much more expensive in D.C. and elsewhere. All right, we're going to move on here. But before we go, if you like the Reason Roundtable, you can come see us in Washington, D.C. next month. We promise it will not go late and over budget. Nick Gillespie, Matt Welch, Katherine Mangu-Ward, and yours truly will be live and on stage at the D.C. Improv. We're going to talk about the news. We're going to talk about Matt Welch's favorite city, Washington, D.C. And we're going to take your questions. Any question you want to ask us, you can line up. Say whatever you want. It's all happening on February 4th. Get more information and tickets at reason.com/events. That is reason.com/events. All right. Last week, ICE agents in Minnesota shot and killed a woman in her car during an enforcement action. You have probably heard about this. It is unpleasant. Federal officials, including DHS Chief Kristi Noem, have said that the woman, whose name is Renee Good, was attempting to run over the ICE agent. They said that she was engaged in an act of domestic terrorism. But there are videos of this, and the videos show the shooting in a different light in many ways, right? The officer quickly reaches for his gun, doesn't really give the Renee Good very much time to respond, and then he shoots into the passenger window of the vehicle. He is not in front of it for the second and third of his 3 shots. And that suggests, I think pretty clearly, that he was not in immediate danger and that Good was simply trying to drive away. Local officials in Minnesota have said, among other things, that the administration's account is bullshit. The whole thing is it's really horrible and tragic and ugly. And it's also pretty divisive. And Matt, that's what I want to ask you about. Like, everybody has tried to litigate about, whether or not the shooting was justified or not. I don't think it almost seems pointless to even try there. Whether, the question is on this podcast here today, I just don't think we're going to come to, we might all agree, but I just don't feel like we're going to add a whole lot of value there. So what I want to ask you here is, we have video from multiple angles, right? Including the agent's cell phone, and people are just seeing what they want to see, right? Opinions about this map almost perfectly in a really depressing way onto people's political views. And I guess my question is, what do we do about that? Are we just so polarized we can't even agree on reality?
Get off Twitter, Peter. I don't know how many times I have to tell you, because when you say people and when you say everyone and when you say conclusions, you are probably reacting to your fellow humans or humanoid types conversations online and in the media. That is not everybody in the country. I think that if you plopped down in the fill-in-the-blank, delightful city, American city of your choice, I'll choose Tulsa because I like Tulsa. And you showed somebody the video of this and described to them what happened and try to get a reaction, I think that there would be a stronger percentage of people who would just say, wow, that's really messed up. Whereas the people who are online all the time and arguing about politics all the time want to go to direct culpability of the political team that they don't like messed up. And those are related but separate things. And I think to the extent that the Trump administration and its apologists and people who enjoy the sight of stepped up law enforcement, of masked law enforcement going into American cities, usually poorly run Democratic-leaning cities like Minneapolis is, and they like to see these aggressive law enforcement actions in those situations. They think that this will make for good politics. My instinct is to say that it won't, that it's not purely divisive, that it isn't mapped on totally onto everyone's political predilections. I don't think that that 100% of Americans are aware that this is happening with some regularity in various places in the country. And to the extent that they are aware, they don't like it, because who likes a papers, please regime among people who can come, poorly trained officers in many cases? They're not really trained for that kind of life and death interaction on the streets. That's not what they came from. I have a friend who's a former senior NYPD guy who very early on in looking at this said, looks to me, and this is pretty consistent with what Jacob Sullum, who you should always read on these kind of issues, concluded in his writing about it. Seems to me it was like messed up. The guy acted really, really badly, and will probably be found within the legal justification of a cop thinking that he was threatened and disposing with his firearm. It happens. But I think that it's not a pure polarization thing. I think that Americans don't like this type of militarized policing, even in the enforcement of immigration laws that they think should be enforced stronger than, let's say, Joe Biden did.
I take your point, but it's not just Twitter. I mean, I got that from the Wall Street Journal, a headline: America watches one shooting and comes to two different conclusions. And maybe that's just the media, and this is the reporter on there is just too online. But I was at a dinner party this weekend. Again, is some journalists in Washington, D.C. Yeah, it was technically in Virginia, but it was inside the Beltway, right? Uh-huh. And there were, people who were quite good friends who have known each other for years and years and years and like each other. And they were arguing about this. They could not come to a kind of a shared understanding based on having watched the videos. And so I don't think that this is entirely an online phenomenon. This does seem like this is something that is happening where people are watching this video and just coming to conclusions that kind of match up with what they already felt about the world. Katherine.
Well, can I
go ahead.
Actually piggyback on that? I agree with you, Peter. But I think that should not really surprise us. I mean, people are analyzing this video the way they would analyze, for instance, replay footage of whether that touchdown was in the end zone and counts for point. I know you're side-eyeing me making a sports reference here, but
I'm worried for you. Is what's happening. Your Michigan will carry. Good. Yeah.
Right. The way you love your team and you're seeing it in the light that was legitimate. They scored. If you don't love the team, you're not thinking that. That is how, we engage in politics the way we used to engage or still engage in sports or entertainment or fandom or anything else. So, of course, people are taking grainy video footage and reaching totally different conclusions about it. I would say that we're not capable of necessarily even reaching the right conclusion. We don't have all the right information. It could be very well that from the angle we're looking at it, it's less clear from different angles. That's already indicative if you watch all the dueling footage. Some people are watching sped up or slowed down footage, where if you watch the sped up footage, it looks like she very deliberately and with malice tries to mow him down because it's sped up. If you watch the slowed down footage, it looks like he had about 10,000 years to contemplate and figure out some alternative strategy and just didn't because he wanted to murder her. And people are watching that and not even aware they're watching slowed down or sped up versions. I think, but that's just how people are. We should criticize political figures and maybe to some extent pundits or commentators who are making strong pronouncements pronunciations that are irresponsible and they're going to inflame the public, very much including the Trump administration figures who've said this is domestic terrorism before we've even looked closely. I mean, she was clearly not motivated. Like, we already know that she was not a domestic terrorist. You can say that the action she took made his actions justified. That doesn't, obviously not a terrorist. So they're saying things that are not true. I think there's been too much also sweeping on the Democratic side to say that there's no conceivable scenario where how the police acted could possibly be justified, when it is, again, quite obvious that it may be justified and could very well be justified when they look at it more closely, while still being a tragedy and something that could have been and should have been avoided, and there should be different policies. But that's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you about, Katherine, is Kristi Noem called this a domestic terrorism incident within like 2 or 3 hours, and maybe it was 4 or 5 hours, but within a few hours of it happening. There was no investigation. We didn't even have all the videos out at that point, just instantly went to, this is domestic terrorism. Is anybody going to buy that, given that it seems like it's a completely preordained conclusion based on not remotely having all the facts?
I think I've become kind of numb to the pronouncement of domestic terrorism, and I suspect other people have as well. Like, that phrase just means bad now, I think, or actionable or something like that.
Well, okay, so I mean, there's some definitions. If you read the reports on this, there is a real FBI definition in which if you look at the way the definition is worded, basically seems like domestic terrorism is if you do something to a government official with a kind of political purpose, and there's maybe a violent intent.
Yeah. So this is
right,
I mean,
and this is like some action was taken, and there was a political intent because clearly this woman did not like that the immigration raids were happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think Reason has written about the kind of overextension of the term domestic terrorism, just like we've written about other terms that are similar, where it becomes this sort of cloudy, well, what was the intention, and what are this person's other affiliations outside of the incident? Like, hate crime laws have this problem as well, and Reason has consistently been skeptical of those types of laws and those types of categorizations of crimes, precisely because it's like, well, if you do enough Instagram posts about how you don't like ICE, and then you get in a traffic accident with an ICE officer, like, it's domestic terrorism by that definition, or whatever, right? And so it just takes you immediately to places that the law won't be good at making clear distinctions, and it'll be further muddied if law enforcement officers and high-ranking officials want to muddy the water. I will say I had a little meta moment, I guess, about the presence of cameras there. Reason has written a million times over the years about how people filming on their own, as well as body cams and other types of surveillance, affect the way that we judge, in particular, incidents where a civilian and a law officer come into contact and everyone disagrees about what happened. And, I think this shows the limits of that. As Robby was saying, you speed it up, you slow it down. It's this angle, it's that angle. You don't immediately see the truth just because there's footage. But I was struck by, if this had happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Kristi Noem's equivalent would say, this person was a terrorist and they tried to kill an officer. And everyone would go, okay. And this is better. Like, even though this is very painful and this is causing all kinds of uncertainty, this is still a better world.
That's the one thing both sides of this dispute can agree on, actually. Everyone's glad we have the footage. No one's saying
because everyone thinks the footage proves that they're right.
Right. But that has been the way, like, body cam footage in general, that's how it's played out, right? I had the idea when we first started doing the body cam thing for cops that it would be like, cops are going to be on much better behavior. This is great. We've basically solved a bunch of problems. And we didn't. And we didn't, interestingly, because it turns out people doing immoral things don't think the things they're doing are immoral, and they think that the footage of them doing immoral things will vindicate the moral thing they did. And that's fascinating. That's a very interesting phenomenon. It's, unfortunately not as simple and straightforward path to justice as anyone would like, but it's, again, still more information is better, and we have a lot of data, even if we don't have all of the truth.
Matt, what do you think about this woman's affiliation, since Katherine brings that up? She was apparently part of some sort of ICE Watch group in Minnesota. I guess my understanding is that post George Floyd, there's a lot of these groups. It's not entirely clear to me how official or how organized they are, but they follow around the agents or sort of go to sites where there's activity. They film, they observe, that sort of thing. And, there are people who say, well, look, maybe that doesn't mean that she deserved to die, but she was putting herself in danger. She was putting herself in a place where she shouldn't have been. She was physically involving herself, all right, getting in the middle of, an enforcement action involving armed officers. It's maybe not right that she died, but she seems pretty annoying. And also, she shouldn't have been doing what she did. And this is an argument that I've heard from people kind of in our world, right? Who we are friendly with. What do you think of that?
Yeah, speak for yourself, pal. I'm friendly with no one.
At least not on this podcast.
Yeah. Well, no. I think that there's a distressing tendency in American politics to try to find a class of people that you find distasteful and then not care too much whether a bad thing happens to them, or to assign them the worst possible motives when they do something X. And I'm not here for any of that. I think that the notion of ICE watching, and I say this with some amount of ignorance about how it works in application, but let's say my neighborhood here had a bunch of stepped up ICE enforcements. I wouldn't be sad if there were people who were following them around and videotaping the interactions, because as we've seen from some of these videotaped interactions, sometimes these ICE guys don't act well. They have incorrect attitudes about the constitutional right for people to film. They act like thugs. They kick over candlelight vigils for people that they've killed. They've been involved with now more than a dozen shootings into vehicles, of which I think maybe one of whom inside was armed with something besides their car. Cars are serious. ICE agents have also been attacked in ambush situations in Texas. So there is a jumpiness out there. What happens when you throw a lot of law enforcement into stressful and oftentimes violent life or death situations is that you get more stressful life and death situations. So I'm not upset when people are out there filming law enforcement, especially in these situations where they're acting, it seems, with less kind of reliability than your local police force would act. So I think that's fine, regardless of how annoying people are. I also think that the tendency that we've seen for a long time now, or a longish time now, of blocking vehicles on the road or using vehicles in some way to engage this. And I saw this footage in Chicago where people were using their cars to block ICE Jeeps. It's pretty dicey. Cars are big things that can hurt people and make people jumpy. And they've been used as actual terrorist weapons, not very often, but often enough so that people get jumpy about them. So it's fine. Watch your ICE. Don't use your car as a weapon, and don't steal someone's camera because they're filming an ICE raid.
Don't use your car as a weapon. Matt Welch. That's the wit and wisdom advice from Papa Welch here. Robby, the feds are not just saying that their position here is not just that the car could be a weapon. It's also that things like hateful rhetoric can be equivalent to violence. I just want to read you two quotes that I came across over the past couple of days here. First one is from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who said, "Violence is anything that threatens them and their safety. So is doxing them. It's videotaping them when they're out on operations." And then there's immigration czar Tom Homan, who said, "There will be more bloodshed unless we can decrease the hateful rhetoric." So this isn't just responding to actual physical threats. This is basically saying, maybe we're going to shoot you if you make our ICE agents sad.
It's wokeness. No, it's look, I mean, this version of the right, this second administration, of Donald Trump has used some of the exact same language and rhetorical strategies that they long complained about, including when there is violence, when there is actual violence against right-wing people or conservative people, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk, not confining that to the actual perpetrators, but broadening it to everyone in the Democratic coalition in the exact same way that Republicans rightfully complained about whenever there was a plausibly right-wing motivated violent person, then it's Fox News' fault and Tucker Carlson's fault and the Republican Party's fault. That was something that was rightfully condemned when mainstream media did that, when the New York Times put it on Sarah Palin years after the fact that of the shooting of the Gabby Giffords in Arizona. But now it's no longer. Those arguments have just been absorbed by both sides and now are wielded equally in bad faith, or not equally. One side one-ups the other in how bad faith it is, and then the other side proceeds to do the same. We should all, just like Katherine said, be incredibly vigilant. The misuse of the term domestic terrorists, again, something that the right was deeply concerned about during the Biden years and to some extent the Obama years, about just vigorous opposition and protesting of Democratic governance, that being labeled some new right-wing nationalist patriot militia movement, that being called domestic terrorism even when it was nonviolent and even when it was First Amendment protected. That is now something that this administration is perfectly willing to deploy rhetorically against people doing legitimate protesting of ICE and recording of ICE and that sort of thing. That does not mean, as you said, that you can obstruct traffic in your car, that you should decline to follow law enforcement instructions if you think they're not there for very good reasons. You still have to do what they say. You still have to be very careful about how you use a car, which is a deadly weapon. But the idea that again, even if the shooting could be found to be justified, which I do think is plausible, does not mean that there's any reason to associate this with domestic terrorism. This is enemies within us, and the government is seeking new reasons to attack our liberties and do very showy, tough guy stuff that I don't know. We could find out. That's very electorally popular, I guess, but I have a feeling is turning off at least some of the moderate or independent Joe Rogan type people. They seem to not be loving this that much. I know I've said this a couple times on podcast appearances, but I'm seeing that class of people quite irritated by this level of behavior from ICE.
And they're not going to vote for Trump the next time, depending, probably, at least if things go as they are now. But in the meantime, how do you get accountability? This is a question I want to ask you, Katherine, because I want to sort of link the accountability question to the pardon power, because Trump can just pardon anyone who is convicted of a federal crime, which might include this ICE agent, right? And he's proven that he's going to do that if the question is this person pro-Trump or not, right? Look at his pardons of the January 6th defendants, right? Trump has shown a very clear willingness to just pardon basically anyone if he sees that person being a pro-Trump person doing something that is like in his defense, on his side, something, right, that is like a MAGA thing. And so I wonder, is there any way to hold an ICE agent accountable for a shooting like this if Trump is just going to pardon them no matter what a jury decides?
Yeah, I mean, we also have the pardon, the sort of increased use of the pardon power. We also have on top of already a bunch of pre-existing practices that make it really, really hard to hold law enforcement accountable, right? We have qualified immunity. We have all these things where the courts have kind of consistently said that we give law enforcement very wide latitude to screw up and still have some protection from personal liability. So it was always hard. It was always going to be hard to hold people accountable. And this definitely makes it a little harder. I actually don't. I think that this particular incident seems less likely to me to end up being a Trump loyalty test type thing, although God knows I've been wrong before.
And Kristi Noem is not treating it as if it's not.
Well, but Kristi Noem doesn't have the pardon power, right? Like ultimately, it is sort of a quirky interpretation that Trump will give it that will determine whether that comes into play. But what Noem does do is she has taken on Trump-like ways of making public statements, and the one that you quoted, actually, there's been a bunch of debate over that quote. Reason has used it a couple times and gotten some pushback, and there's been a lot of discourse about it because she did the Trump thing where she says several clauses in the middle of the sentence and doesn't really connect them with if-then statements or any kind of logical order. And so we don't exactly know what she said. So there's actually a lot of debate about whether she was saying that videotaping is violence. I think that is what she was saying. And I think she has said other things that have supported that. But of course, ICE agents do encounter real violence as well. They do encounter people throwing rocks at their heads just as they walk by. That does happen. And it would be right for Kristi Noem to say, like, yo, we're not going to stand for that. But then there's all the rest of this stuff up to and including, a guy standing on his porch, which is clearly out of the way, filming and winding up, in a direct violent confrontation with law enforcement because of it. So there's this huge spectrum, and Noem and Trump and others are talking around it using terms like domestic terrorist when they don't really apply, and it just creates this giant cloud of uncertainty. Maybe that ends in a pardon. Maybe that ends in a, less zealous prosecution. It's just maximum uncertainty in order to provide as much political cover as possible. And that's really bad for rule of law.
Yeah. And something that we should note here is that it does seem as if this ICE agent had, in fact, been dragged by a car in an unrelated incident several months earlier. And that may have, impacted his judgment in that moment. I don't think that is necessarily an excuse, but it does kind of suggest a frame of mind. But no, you're right. This is just what happens, I think, kind of inevitably when you have masked agents of the state running around doing stuff that's barely legal, unaccountable. It's not a good situation. But I think that is unfortunately
the level
a pretty
at which this masked agent might have been previously traumatized does not interest me as an argument. Woo, doggies. Like, fine, we can use it to understand, but like that line of argument to me is totally insane. Like, yes, law enforcement agents are people too, but no, that doesn't explain, that doesn't excuse any of this behavior in a way that should be relevant to the general public.
But I mean, that's true for both of them, right?
Both sides.
Right. I should not consider whether if she had a negative, interaction with law enforcement the day before doesn't change whether if what happened is she drove the car at him, whether he was justified in doing that, nor does his past behavior having endured some scenario. It should be judged. The 3 seconds in which this occurs should be judged, or maybe a little bit more than that, in isolation by themselves, is what I say.
Okay. We're going to move on. Matt Welch, that gives me an opportunity to ask you a question. What about Iran? Because there's a bunch of protests there. There's been an internet blackout. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. This has been going on for several weeks. But there were reports over the weekend that came out from human rights groups, international watchers, saying that Iran has killed hundreds of protesters as the protests have grown sort of more vociferous. Started out as protesting economic conditions, but now it seems to have moved on to we want regime change. And that is, at least the reports say, that is when the government decided to crack down and has started killing people. So just what do you make of this? And what do you make of the reports that the Trump administration is maybe considering military action against Iran because they are using force against their own people?
This is some of the largest, most inspiring, thrilling, fraught, harrowing protests against an authoritarian government that we've seen in our lifetimes since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Who knows what direction it'll go? Most times things don't go in great directions, revolutions and otherwise, including in Iran. Hundreds of people, perhaps even thousands, we really, really don't know. The country is literally in darkness. So we don't know. And it's terrifying and heartrending. The Trump administration Trump himself has said, I think it was like 5 days ago for the first time, it's like, you better not hurt any of these protesters or we'll hit you real hard, which is a direct threat from a president who has been engaging in hit you real hard activities recently. I am one person who doesn't agree with that as a smart thing for an American president to do, as much as I absolutely want those people who are shredding Jack White songs on the streets of Tehran or wherever it was, on the streets of Iran, to win. I want them to win. I want them to topple their authoritarian Islamic despots who've been keeping their thumbs on their necks for so long. But I don't want the United States to be the one to deliver that victory, because I have the perhaps narrow opinion that it's possible to root for people without wanting to use to America to press the big red button that says do something. In part because when America does that, that means that the people who win on the ground with American assistance own less of that victory, and it becomes more suspect in the eyes of the population and therefore less lasting. Again, that's a minority opinion just in general. People don't like to hear it, but it is the Jesse Walker opinion, so therefore absolutely correct. We'll see what happens. This has the potential to be just a gigantic development, and it does speak to the weakening that Iran has faced at the hands of Israel in particular, and also the United States. Used to be, engaging in an encirclement regime, a ring of fire around Israel through a lot of proxies, doing a lot of bad things to a lot of bad people and using a lot of bad people. And that network has been almost absolutely defanged. And this is possibly one partial result of that. For people who think that we're about to see the perfect fruition and justification of whatever American policy it is that you favor, just know that there's been a lot of victories declared prematurely in the past. So my fingers are crossed. I hope that America doesn't screw up, and I really, really hope that the despots there would just resign rather than shooting into the crowds of absolutely heroic, largely young protesters of both sexes trying to live their best lives.
All right, I'm going to press the big red do something button here and move us on to an ad. When we come back, we're going to take a listener question about what, if anything, Congress is going to do about all of this. The Reason Roundtable is sponsored by Crowd Health. So around this time every year, open enrollment season rolls around for health insurance. Health insurance companies hope you'll just renew your policy without looking at the price or the fine print, which can be pretty confusing. Crowd Health, the healthcare funding alternative for people who want to make their own healthcare decisions, is a different way of doing things. Crowd Health, it's a community of people funding each other's medical bills directly. There's no middleman, no networks, no nonsense. So I write a lot about health insurance, and I'll tell you, even I know it can be confusing, it can be frustrating, just a real pain to deal with. Crowd Health is an alternative to health insurance. You can join for just $100 with access to low-cost prescriptions, lab testing tools, a database of quality doctors who've been vetted by Crowd Health. Something major happens, you pay the first $500, and then Crowd Health steps in to help out with funding the rest. This is not Obamacare with all its frustrations and high prices. It's a different way of thinking about funding medical expenses. Crowd Health members have saved over $40 million in healthcare expenses because they refuse to overpay for healthcare. This open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months using code REASON at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, code REASON. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. Join crowdhealth.com. All right, a reminder, we love to answer your questions. If you want us to answer one of your questions on air, you can send us your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long question to podcasts@reason.com. That is podcasts@reason.com. This week's listener question comes from Fred, who writes, I would like to first thank you for giving a much-needed voice to us civil libertarians. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Fred. The Democratic Party has gone after Trump for various first-term misconducts, classified documents, affair hush money, business records, etc. Yet when he abuses his powers as POTUS in a truly meaningful way, such as ICE DHS conduct, this week, missile strikes on Caribbean boats, engaging in foreign wars without congressional approval, it is crickets. So what has materially changed within the Democratic Party's resistance? I know the prospect of re-election is not on the horizon, but it seems that the Democrats have lost all validity to any claims of the moral high grounds and accountability. Are we really just waiting 3 years for this to be over? Katherine, how about you? Are you just waiting 3 years for this to be over?
If I just waited 3 years for each administration to be over, I would always be waiting. So no, not quite. And I think actually, there's a couple things going on there. The list from ways in which the congressional opposition has tried to hold Trump accountable were all for the type of misconduct that has historically, at least somewhat historically, fallen under impeachable conduct. We usually don't say we're going to impeach somebody for just being like a really, really bad president. Maybe we should. Maybe that would be better. Reason has certainly opined over the years, like impeach more presidents, and I guess impeach and remove would maybe be even more relevant in this case. But Congress has all these ways of holding Trump accountable or restraining him that are not just investigations of Trump or impeachments. And so, I do think Congress is trying. There's a bunch of congressmen who are trying really hard to figure out how to restrain him on the war powers front. And, they're not necessarily winning those votes, but they are doing the thing, albeit belatedly, albeit pathetically. They are doing the thing that they are supposed to do, which is to say, hey, we assert our authority on this matter, and we want to claim that prerogative, which we believe is ours. So I am a little hesitant to say, if Trump could be removed, he should be removed by Congress for just like being a really, really bad president on these fronts. I don't actually think that. I think that leads us into a war of all against all. Like, we'll just remove the next president and then the next one and then the next one. And then where are we? But
and we're just like politics in 2026, except a little bit further advanced.
But I do think Congress has a role in restraining the power of the presidency, just as the courts do. And I would love to see it take more aggressive steps on that front. And I would love to see voters vote for congressmen who say they're going to do that, right? Like, that is the remedy in the short run. It's not just like, well, I guess he's president, he can do whatever he wants. We have all these tools and we should use them.
Yeah, there is a midterm election this year. But in fact, already you've got Democrats just on the ICE front who are talking about impeaching Kristi Noem. I don't think that's going to happen. At least talking about it. There are Democrats who want to restrict funding for DHS and for ICE. And this is actually a place where I think they might be able to make an impact. I wouldn't bet on it necessarily, but it's a good idea. Like, fund these agencies with less money. This is budget season. It's kind of always budget season in Congress because they never pass a budget. But like, you don't have to spend as much money on enforcement here. And then the other thing is that there's a proposal from Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, basically just says ICE agents cannot work unmasked. And again, I don't know that this is actually going to pass, but that would be a good idea. The masking is a problem, and it is contributing to the hostilities on the ground here. Robby, what do you think about this question?
A couple things. I mean, to the extent there's a difference between the first Trump administration and what's going on now, or in terms of the Democratic resolve to resist, I mean, they had a majority in the House during, at least for part of the first Trump term. There was like more they could actually do. Also, they just tried a bunch of strategies that didn't really work. So, and also there was way more internal opposition to Trump within the Republican Party. So there was some bipartisan buy-in for a little while, at least. That is now totally gone. So frankly, I mean, I think to some extent, the Democrats have responded kind of to just we tried a couple different approaches. That did not end the phenomenon that is Trump. So we're not going to try, especially now that we don't have any congressional majority whatsoever, some kind of fraught impeachment or corruption related thing. Yes, it could be about the policies, but just Congress overall has not shown much interest. This isn't unique to Trump. It's just a feature of how Congress has evolved to give the president wide leverage on wide. I don't want to say leverage. What am I trying to say?
Latitude.
Latitude. That's what I'm looking for. Wide latitude.
Longitude.
Yeah. It goes this way, goes this way. Who knows? Greenland is at one of them.
It's kind of like math. Let's not have Robby do that. Maybe we need to bring Matt Welch in here.
Greenland is at one of them.
To the executive to do whatever he wants, and that's true of on foreign policy front particularly. That's true of Donald Trump. That's true of Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and so they're not. And then the party that is the president's party has no interest in constraining him whatsoever. So it's for that combination of factors that you're not seeing like, oh, wow, but Venezuela, that's obviously unconstitutional. Let's really hold some hearings on that. It's not what Congress, unfortunately, is interested in doing.
Matt, you're always so cheery about Congress. Every time, a week on this podcast, you're just like, yep, you can count on Congress to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So why aren't they in this case?
I think that was sarcastic, what you just said. I would suggest that one of the problems the Democrats have in general is that on any short list of 5 or 6 things, aspects of Trump's presidency that they find most objectionable, the categories that it's coming from are categories that Democrats have not necessarily the opposite answer. So he's doing a whole bunch of tariffs, especially against China. Yep. You've been the pro-tariff party, and we're winning the pro-tariff, or like you were more pro-tariff than the Republicans were all the way up until Donald Trump. Joe Biden continued doing some of those tariffs, including against Red China. So that's a problem. Using executive power in brash new areas that no one had previously contemplated before. Joe Biden did that too, people. I'm not whatabouting. I'm just saying that you could be the opposition party to say, you know what, we're not going to use executive power to, I don't know, waive away student loans without congressional approval, to just cite one random thing. Or in Barack Obama's case of like, we're just not going to enforce immigration law against this population of 4 million people, even though Congress didn't have any say in particularly that. These are kind of big using pen and phone kind of moments. Donald Trump is turbocharging this stuff. He's using his pen and phone more than any president has since FDR and bragging about it. But a way to mount an opposition to that type of behavior is to say the principle of that is bad. And we are the party for the opposite of that principle. Kind of difficult for them to do that. And that's also true in the case of unilateral war making, which Trump has been particularly brazen about, barely even acknowledging that he needs to inform anybody to do snatch and grab operations of regime leaders in Venezuela and blowing up drug boats. Look at the way Barack Obama treated Congress during the eventual overthrow of Gaddafi. It's like, I'll tell you about it. The kinetic military operations, maybe in 90 or 180 days or whatever. It's not very important. And then Hillary Clinton talks about it as using smart power at its best. So this is part of the problem. I think Democrats are doing things. They aren't getting as much notice because there's just not as much journalism in the world, and journalism follows political conflicts. And if Republicans are in lockstep saying they're not going to do things, then you're not going to have much to cover, except for the war powers resolution this week, which I'm looking forward to in the Senate. So I wish Democrats would follow the logic of the bad using of executive power, but I have zero hope that's ever going to happen.
All right. Speaking of Democrats doing things, let's talk about California and the state's new wealth tax. Sure looks like it is driving billionaires out of the state. There is a huge rush to buy up luxury property in Miami. Steven Spielberg, who is a billionaire, appears to have relocated to New York. The backers of this tax had to know. Like, this is the thing that I don't understand. The backers of this tax had to know that this would happen because there's a whole bunch of European countries that have tried this. And this is the same thing that has happened every single time a European country has passed one of these wealth tax laws. They just lose all the rich people. They just move. They don't pay the tax. They just leave the country. So, Katherine, does California just not want billionaires in the state? Is this an unintended consequence or an intended one?
The point isn't to raise revenue. The point is to win elections.
Thanks.
That's it.
Very succinct. Are they going to win elections on this?
I think people like it when you say, we're going to take all the money from the billionaires. A lot of people will vote for you in California.
But you can just say that without passing the law and having the billionaires relocate, and then also maybe relocate their companies and take a bunch of the jobs that the non-billionaires have with them.
I mean, you don't got to explain to me why it's a bad policy, but
it is a podcast. That's how they work.
I do think in general, politicians, they struggle with cognitive dissonance, right? And so if they say we're going to do this policy, it's better for them if they kind of do the policy. Like, it feels better. It's easier to say, look, I'm kind of going to do it. I kind of did it, than to just whole straight up lie, which I think was the alternative you were proposing. Not to say politicians don't love to lie, but like I think it's really very simple. I think it's just like, listen, the problem where the expenditures and the revenues don't match up is somebody else's problem. My problem is, how do I win the next election? And saying we're going to tax the billionaires and that'll pay for everything is an awesome way to win elections in California for now.
Matt, what does this tell us about the kind of general state of California specifically, but just blue state governance, budgeting, fiscal policy, like this sort of, I mean, we're seeing this in New York in some ways too. You see this in Massachusetts as well. All of the big blue states, they're just looking for ways to ratchet up taxes, but to do so in ways that their base of like relatively successful college educated voters don't feel. Is that going to work? Can you pay for New York's budget, for California's budget, for Massachusetts? Is this a good plan, and if not, what's going to happen?
Well, what's going to happen is what's already happening. People are leaving. Let's keep in mind how incredibly asinine this is. Not just like, when you pass a billionaire tax, the billionaires leave, which they do. They tried this in, I think it was Maryland with a millionaire's tax. The millionaires left too. People will leave. It's not that hard to leave when you're super rich. And even when you're not that rich, you can leave. But California added the wrinkle of this is a thing that'll be voted on in November of this year. This year is 2026. When does it apply? For the year 2026. So they could vote it down. It's possible, probably not going to happen, but it's possible that California voters will say, no, this is idiotic economic policy. And Lord knows we're not going to do that in the state of California. Just stay with me. It's possible in theory that could happen. It's not going to happen anyways. But if they said no, you still would get everyone to leave because it's applicable to this year. It's applicable to right now. So people are going to leave regardless. This is amazing. I mean, there's only a handful of public policies in these United States can you just point to and say everybody involved deserves a clown nose the size of the state of Idaho. The California High-Speed Rail Project, as the Reason Foundation has rightly pointed out from before the beginning, is one of those things. And we just see evidence of that day after day after day after day. And this one especially, and not only, but that retroactive element of it, of it doesn't matter whether you pass it or not, they have to leave because we're going to tax not just their wealth, people, their unrealized capital gains in the place where Silicon Valley is. This is how stupid they are. They're saying the government has a right to your money that you haven't cashed out yet. So you have to cash it out and then give it to the government. Or you could file as a Delaware company and move to Florida. What do you think they're going to do? Amazing.
I just also love to envision the accountants of every single wealthy person in California, furiously typing out memos right now to their clients that are like, all right, you're going to need to keep a calendar of how many days you've been in the state. There's rich people have so many ways to change the jurisdiction in which they pay taxes. And all it costs is lawyers' fees. All it costs is accountants' fees. So it's not even like maybe California wants to get rid of their billionaires, but they won't. The billionaires will still be there for, 92 days a year or whatever it is that they want to do and exert their malevolent influence in whatever way I suppose the anti-billionaire rhetoric would suggest might happen. They're just going to take a little extra time and pay a lot of money to highly specialized professionals to not pay their taxes there.
There was a story going around sort of post-pandemic when a bunch of, rich people from New York were moving to Florida. And it was about how the new hot place to be for wealthy people was at the private jet airport at 11:58 p.m. Because it was if you timed your flight so that you left before midnight, then it didn't count as a day or something. I'm going to get the details on this wrong. It doesn't matter. They were doing some incredibly complicated location private jet time shifting, basically to avoid paying New York state taxes because they lived in Florida now. And they were just getting away with it because that's how taxes work. And also, Florida seems nice, right? I guess the Google founders, at least one of them, has bought $170 million worth of property on the big billionaire island in Miami. Robby, is this just a big win for Florida?
It is a big win for Florida, absolutely. That's where a lot of these people want to go, and maybe also Texas. I just wanted to echo what has been said in terms of this is a goal of not all, certainly Democrats or all liberals or something, but the rhetoric about billionaires is just off the charts crazy. They're responsible for every evil in our society, so much from progressive folks, and that has, I think, trickled down to much of the Democratic constituency. So there's you ask why they are doing this. They're doing this because they really hate these people and they have demonized them and have a greater project of demonizing wealth and capitalism and success, for which these people are the avatar of. So they're like, is it harder for them now to get their accountant to figure out how to disguise money? Well, good. As long as we've made it a little harder, we've accomplished something psychologically fulfilling for us, because it's about punishing a class of people that they hate. Even if they don't drive, they're happy to drive them out of the state. If they don't succeed in that, at least they've made their work more difficult in some fashion. That is honestly the impression I get from people like Pramila Jayapal, I believe it was her, correct me if I'm wrong, who had a tweet just a few weeks ago that was, it's not the X, it's the billionaires. It's not the Y, it's the billionaires. Every problem that they can think of, from climate change to whatever, people still not masking up sufficiently in the post-COVID landscape, is the fault of billionaires. That's not, again, I don't mean to demonize or say that's literally everyone with a D next to their name. Certainly not. I don't even think Ro Khanna is that crazy by any stretch of the imagination, even though he does, from what I understand, support this
a few
wealth
years
tax.
ago, I'm pretty sure he was opposed to
he is opposed to taxing unrealized gains. He had some complicated Twitter answer for why this was not that, or why the revision he would like to see would be taking that part of it off the table. Again, I think a reasonable Democrat on many subjects, including a lot of policies having to do with tech. Not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but a significant portion of them.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic. California Democrats have consistently proven that they can't build anything, and now they're going a step further and just basically kicking out everyone who did build anything successfully. So, yeah, good luck with that, guys. All right, let's move on to our cultural consumptions. What have you been watching, reading, listening to, otherwise consuming in the cultural realm? Katherine Mangu-Ward, let's start with you.
I am reading a dark fantasy novel about what happens when there's motivation to do overpowering military force, and then maybe the people who have to fight those wars and also the civilians suffer. So it's great escapism. It's The Poppy War by R.F. Kang. I don't actually know how to pronounce the name because I'm Matt Welch, and it's really good. I would say, if anything, I like in my fantasy novels, if they are going to be about kind of military strategy and empire building, I want it to be even more complicated and arcane. Like, this is like it's basically just a kind of thinly veiled version of the kind of world historical relationship between China and Japan. I want it more thinly. I mean, I want it more veiled, or I want it less thinly veiled. Like, I'm struggling with the in-between place of, it feels like an oversimplified fantasy version of the bits of real life history that I know. That said, it's a very, very good read. It won a ton of prizes, rightly so. There are two more. I will probably read them. If you enjoy a kind of, it starts out as like a little Bildungsroman. We have a peasant girl who's come in from the provinces to the big military academy, but you'll be shocked to learn that she's a special girl. She has special powers, and that will change the course of history, et cetera, et cetera.
Did she escape from an Orson Scott Card book?
She did. She escaped both from the Hunger Games books and from Orson Scott Card book. And actually,
the adults, they just didn't understand her.
There is a brief moment when I was like, "Ooh, are we gonna do Ender's Game like Dragon Army?" Like, there's a minute when like we have a little group of misfits that are a special unit within the military school. We don't really end up dwelling on that. Anyway, it's a fun read, and I will probably read the next two, The Poppy War.
The enemy's gate is down, and the next person to talk is Robby.
Speaking of similar-ish things, dragon stuff, in anticipation of this new Game of Thrones show that comes out this weekend, I was refamiliarizing myself with the source material for that one, which is these Dunk and Eggs short story novellas set in the Game of Thrones universe. So this is, if you're paying attention to Game of Thrones lore, this is happening somewhere between the two series that already exist. So Game of Thrones takes place in the year 300 by the Targaryen calendar, and the House of the Dragon show is in year 130, and this show is going to be in about year 200, 210. So it's pretty much halfway between the two series. So this one, like those, also has the Targaryen dynasty as the background in the ruling family in Westeros. The cool thing about the Dunk and Egg stories is that whereas Game of Thrones very much focuses on almost all the characters are nobles or of the noble families, the Starks, the Lannisters, etc., the House of the Dragon show is that even more so, very much just about the Lannister dynasty, or the Targaryen dynasty, excuse me. This one is about the plight of the common man during the wars of the dragons and the people, and like, what are the peasants up to? And the trailers for it look really good, and I'm actually excited about it. There's been a lot of sadness and depression about Game of Thrones in general, I think, because the final season was just so bad, is the universal correct take, that has even somehow dragged down appreciation for the House of Dragon show, which is a very high quality. The second season was maybe a little meandering, but quite good, and suffering from none of the problems that the last season of Game of Thrones had. So I'll be interested to see if this revives interest in the franchise. It's a good story of it's kind of a prince and a pauper, like little Targaryen princeling seeing the real world, heartwarming in some sense.
The problem with the final season of Game of Thrones wasn't that the story, the whole season is not bad. The final episode is bad. The final episode final two episodes are terrible. They don't wrap anything up in any kind of satisfying way. That part of the season is awful, but there's a bunch of really good stuff within that season. And I think this is kind of the way that Game of Thrones ran throughout its whole run. Is it never got anywhere all that satisfying. It just sort of got you to the next place, right? It got you, it never resolved anything in a satisfying way, I should say. Instead, what it did was it did something interesting and then got you to the next place, and then gave you a bunch more, maybe not mysteries, but sort of things to sort of pay attention to and hang on to. And the series got more and more cinematic as the budgets got bigger and as the show got more popular. And if that's what you were watching the show for, then the first, 3-4 episodes of the final season were fantastically cinematic. In fact, if you go back and read some of the reports, the creators wanted that final season to be something like 3 or 4 theatrically exhibited movies. They were just looking to make features, and you can see that there. But what they weren't trying to do is end the story in a satisfying way. And I worry actually that House of the Dragon is going to do the same thing, because the end of season 2 of House of the Dragon is basically, we're not going to end this. We're not going to resolve this. We're just going to keep it going because you guys love Game of Thrones and dragon shit. And you know what? I love Game of Thrones and dragon shit, but I'm going to complain about it every single time. Matt Welch, what do you have for us for a cultural recommendation? I hope it has dragons in it.
There I was, not thinking about dragons, enjoying wrapping up a beautiful red sauce dinner in the big city here, and walking and then noticing that there's a multiplex across the street. And hey, you know what? We're young. It's the big city. It's a Friday night. Let's see what's playing at the multiplex. And so we walk up and ask, hey, what's the very next movie you have on right now? Because it's not as obvious these days, strangely. And then the nice gal there,
it's on your phone. You don't have to ask him. It's just on your phone.
You're in front of the building, you absolute troglodyte. So anyways, wanted to go see the big city cinema. What's the next showing? What do you got there? And she uttered a word I hadn't heard.
You asked a movie theater attendant?
Let the man tell his story.
Okay.
Years, which is the last time I saw it. We're playing the 40th anniversary showing of Labyrinth. That's the next one coming. So
that's the best thing that could have happened to you.
So for those of you who don't remember Labyrinth, And I'd kind of forgotten some aspects, but I knew that it was Jim Henson. It was Muppets. It was kind of where the Wild Things were. It was David Bowie with space hair. And somehow there's a little Monty Python twist because Terry Jones wrote the first draft, at least, of the screenplay. And I like all of those things, more or less. And this might be the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. This might be the movie where absolutely nothing works. Jennifer Connelly plays the baby fat-cheeked 15-year-old trying to hunt down her 1-year-old baby who she's given up to the Goblin King. It doesn't really matter. It's a 40th anniversary showing. Is playing limited screening from January 8th to January 15th, 1 week only. So if you really want to see why, in the mid-1980s, why the replacements were necessary, why alternative rock, why everything except for whatever was dominant culture was necessary, and certainly music was necessary, go see this movie. This movie is the movie in which nothing works, and it was all nearly full. It's become a cult classic for some reason. It was a bomb when it came out. It drove Jim Henson into much deserved despair because it was awful. But it's a sight to see. This is why the 80s were actually terrible, regardless of whatever nostalgia one might have for it.
I think Katherine had some kind of awakening watching this movie.
Katherine, do you want to retort?
This is the worst take I've ever heard. This movie is delightful. This movie is wacky. It is everything that is good about this moment. Nobody is taking themselves seriously. Yes, it's chaotic.
Do we want to talk about David Bowie's pants?
Yes, we do. Many of us enjoyed David Bowie's pants in that movie, in that moment.
Or something?
It's
not everything is for everyone.
Gray,
okay, it wasn't for you. It was for me.
Long johns that are somehow very revealing.
I think that's what the kids are wearing these days.
Right.
How dare you refer to David Bowie's costume in The Labyrinth as long johns? I simply shan't tolerate it.
Like, if you go to the cool bars in Bushwick, they're just dressed as David Bowie now. No?
That hair, I'm looking at it online. The hair is bad.
There is a certain type of person.
The hair is hard to
I know this
past.
podcast needs to be over, but I have to say, you know how there's a certain type of dude who's definitely 1 to 3 of the people on this podcast who, when they watch Lord of the Rings, they really want to tell you about how Aragorn broke his toe when he kicked the thing.
Oh, do you know about that?
Do you want to tell me,
Robbie?
Robbie?
We could watch it and I'd let you know.
You could tell me when that happened? David Bowie doing the little trick with the glass ball in Labyrinth. It's somebody else's arms behind him.
Yeah, that's true.
You can watch this on YouTube. It's such a good practical trick. I love this. I was actually going to tell you about it, Katherine.
I know. So there's a certain other type of person who it's the same thing. Telling someone that fact is the same thing. Anyway.
Catherine,
shut up.
How
You're
much
wrong.
did you model yourself on Jennifer Connelly from that movie for like a period of your life?
I mostly just in my eyebrow maintenance routine, if I'm being honest. Her eyebrows are top tier eyebrows from that date to today, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise.
All right. I think that is a good place to move on. I do not have any top tier eyebrows in my recommendation. It's No Other Choice. It's the new movie from South Korean director Park Chan-wook, if you know who he is, it's because he directed the movie Old Boy, which was remade by Spike Lee a few years ago. The remake is not very good. Sadly, they sort of took it away from Spike Lee in edit. It was supposed to be 3 hours long. They cut it down to an hour and 40 minutes. Never do that. Things should be long. Things should be long. They need to be long when the director says it's 3 hours, you don't make it an hour and 40 minutes. You don't cut up the incredible single take fight scene in the middle of it. But in the original Park Chan-wook version, they didn't cut up the original, the long single take fight scene in the middle of it. It has one of the great twist endings ever. It's really sort of mean-spirited and crazy and tragic. And so No Other Choice is it's in kind of a similar mold. It's really precise and kind of absurdist and dark and sort of weird. It is a satire of capitalism. Like, there's no way to kind of avoid that. But it's also a satire of masculinity and like men without purpose and trying to figure out what to do with yourself if you don't have a job. Because basically it's a movie about a guy who had a job at a paper company and they decide to downsize. And so he gets fired. And then there's only one paper company that's hiring for a senior enough position for him. And he's like, how many other people could there be who can do this job? And he comes up with the answer. It's like 3 or so. And he's like, well, they're not going to get the job if they're dead. and maybe I can make that happen. And so he goes about basically trying to off the competition. And this is kind of, again, a satire of capitalism, right? And sort of the way that it pits people against each other and leaves you with no other choice. It's not, I don't agree with this movie on its messages, but it's very funny. It's very dark. It's just gorgeously shot. This is a movie for fans of David Fincher, Bong Joon-ho, maybe even Quentin Tarantino. I really liked it. I'm a big fan of this director. If you like South Korean cinema, if you like things that are dark and cynical and mean-spirited and kind of weird, and don't mind a critique of capitalism and masculinity, strongly recommend No Other Choice. And I have no other choice but to end this podcast right now. Folks, that is our show. As always, if you like this show, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That is reason.com/donate. Thank you all so much for listening. The Reason Roundtable will return, including in a live show in Washington, D.C. next month.